The wayfinding landscape is changing, so welcome to Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast. We want to connect with leading experts, tech innovators, and key contributors to exchange knowledge and innovation in physical and digital wayfinding. We want to shape the future of wayfinding through discussion, collaboration, and shared expertise. And this is why we have created this podcast series. Enjoy the episode.
In today's podcast, I'd like to welcome Paul Nulty, a designer, owner, and director of Nulty, the award-winning lighting design consultancy. I briefly remember Nulty making an impact back in 2012, and I think we met on a John Lewis project. But since then, our paths have crossed on numerous projects. More lately, I think Grosvenor Square, Harrods, and Holland Park Gate. In that time, Nulty's grown in reputation, size, and I think you now have 6 studios across the world. Is that right?
I think so. It's hard to keep track. We're about to open our 7th, that's why. So, we really are growing quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge achievement from 2011. I mean, it'd be really interesting. I really wanted to hear more about your story and find out about your success, and then try and maybe explore where lighting design and wayfinding design overlap. I'm sure you've come across many more wayfinding and signage consultants. We work with lots of different lighting, and there is a lot of coordination. There is some overlap, and it'd be quite interesting to explore that. But first, I mean, tell us about your incredible backstory and rise to success, and the birth of Nulty, and how you've become. How you've built that reputation in a relatively short amount of time?
I don't know where to start, really. Gosh. We started in 2012, and 2011. Sorry, we started. It feels like a very long time ago now. Since then, we've grown to, I think you just quite rightly said, 6 offices. We're about to open our 7th. We are in London, it's where we started, and then our second office was in Dubai. I think the Dubai team are 8 years old now. After that, we actually opened an office in Lebanon for a while, in Beirut, which is a wonderful city. But for various socio-economic reasons, it just didn't work. I'm a believer that, you try things, and if it doesn't work, admit defeat and move on very quickly. So we did that with the office in Beirut. After that, we opened in Bangkok. So we've got a wonderful team of, I think, 14 people now in Bangkok and growing. Then most recently, 2 years ago, we opened a studio in a place called Pune, which most people have never heard of, but is about 2 hours outside of Mumbai in India. And I think, for us, India is a really interesting market. I think it's still a very immature market for design consultancy, but I think it's the next big thing. And with China and kind of Eastern Europe doing their best to eat themselves at the moment, then I think, we've got to start looking at other international markets as well. We can't just rely on Europe and the Middle East, and I think, if anything, the Middle East is probably the most thriving market. So we're about to open our second office in India, and we're also in the process of opening in Dublin, and then we have a bit of a post box in Miami as well. So we're sort of quite spread across the world. It is deliberate. We work on a huge variety of projects, which range from small residential projects through to retail, boutique retail projects, through to shopping malls, through to food courts, to restaurants, into hotels. We do full hotels, into commercial space. We do an awful lot of offices as well, both developer-led offices and tenant fit-out for workplace. And then we do a huge amount of public realm as well. So our largest project at the moment is in the Middle East, and it is the size of Belgium. So it's huge, vast project. You can probably guess one of about 3 out there.
I think I know exactly which one that is.
So, we do everything, from all sizes. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because I think as a designer, we get to learn things on one project that are transferable to other sectors and other types of projects. So, that's really interesting. I could never be an architect. I would be bored of working on the same job all day, every day for years and years and years and years and years. I love the fact that we dip in, we dip out. and we're working on a real kind of variety of sectors and project typologies. I mean, the most random project we've ever done is the new Piccadilly line tube train, which is about to come into service. So that's working with industrial designers. A really interesting project, but that led on to a master plan for London Underground, and all projects sort of lead places. So I'm never a fan of saying no to projects. I'm always a fan of saying, well, we can't do it for that price, but we can do this. We can do X, Y, or Z. But from little acorns grow big trees. So I think it's really important to prioritize the relationship rather than the job, if that makes any sense. So and I think that's probably one of the reasons we've grown so quickly. That we've made a lot of friends. We've supported a lot of other lead consultants, and that sort of enabled us to take on a lot of work. We've obviously had to go and find really good, employees or members of the team, and I think you'll be in exactly the same boat, I'm sure. You're only as good as the people you employ. For us, I've been very fortunate that I've surrounded myself with a really good bunch of people. And if I'm honest with you, probably designers that are better than I am, people that are really, really good. And I'm happy to sort of allow them to be and to enable them. And I think good consultancies thrive when you create a space that other people can grow and thrive and enjoy being in. And I think really my philosophy has always been to lead from the back, not the front. I try not to be a bottleneck. And that means that the team really enjoy, they take accountability, they take responsibility, and they really enjoy the projects that they work on. And the net result of that is that they build great relationships with clients. Clients enjoy working with us. And then it just sort of becomes a snowball effect. One project leads to another. And I think, that's been the mark of our success as a business. We're very happy to try new things. We've brought in-house marketing and PR in. We've brought various other strings to our bow in-house, which some of our competitors haven't. And where it's worked, great. And where it hasn't worked, we've sort of failed quickly and moved on. And I think, it's been a fun 12 years. It feels like 20 years. It really does.
Yeah. So much of what you're saying there sounds familiar. You've crammed a lot in quite a few years. So, congratulations, well done there. Just in terms of you personally, what was your background? You mentioned that you're working with industrial designers. I know, me and my business partner both from industrial design background. Where do you get lighting designers from? Where did you come from?
My background is theatre, so I studied performance design. That's what I studied. So I studied set design, costume design, and lighting design. Most people are surprised that I understand costume design and I can use a sewing machine. But I was always interested in the space, right? And in theatre, it was really kind of interesting studying as a theatrical kind of set designer. I found through my studies, I was sort of stripping more and more physical stuff away of the set and sort of creating interesting empty space. And I was really interested in people's interaction with empty space. And that sort of segued quite nicely into lighting, because then you start introducing light into it and you can start to storytell. You can start to sort of draw people in. You can start to create space and a sense of space purely through the use of light. Which is really interesting, because then when you sort of segue into the architectural lighting world, and I very quickly learned in theatrical lighting, basically 90% of the work goes to 5% of the designers, and the rest of people are just scrabbling around in fringe venues, getting electric shocks and not earning very much money, basically. So I very quickly realised there was no money to be made in theatre design. And actually, I really enjoyed architectural lighting anyway, because it was about treating the real world as though it is a set. I think my final dissertation was titled, "If all the world is a stage, then perhaps we should have better lighting." So it was very much about creating places and placemaking and interesting spaces that people interacted with, which is really interesting because for me, I'm fascinated by people, and I really love the way people talk to brands. I love the way that brands talk to people. I love the way that people interact with space and connect with space. So to start defining space and people's connection with space through the medium of light was fascinating, and it still fascinates me. And I mean, from a signage and wayfinding point of view, not to want to alienate the audience, but if you light it really well, you probably don't even need signage and wayfinding. You should obviate the need for it, because the eye should be drawn to the brightest point in the space. You can help people navigate a space through the use of light intensity and rhythm and drama and so forth. So it's a fascinating medium, light, and I feel very privileged to be working with it, frankly, every day. So I sort of came in through theatre, and it's interesting for us because we look far and wide for members of the team, and lighting design is a bit of an oddity because there is no official qualification needed. Anybody can pitch up and be a lighting designer. I'm sure it's the same in signage and
same with wayfinding.
Yeah, and that's frustrating because it means you can get really talented, great people, but you can get people that don't have a clue, that graduates come straight into the industry and think, well, here I am. And that's a bit of a dangerous thing because clients don't often understand the difference. They don't often understand why one is more expensive than the other. The assumption is that you're a consultant, therefore you're all the same, and that's not the case. So we're sort of constantly trying to educate clients, to understand exactly what services and exactly what talent they are acquiring for their projects. And that's sometimes difficult. I'm sure those pains. But for us, we do try. We look far and wide for staff. So we've got designers with architectural backgrounds. We've got designers with interior design backgrounds. Product design is quite a common industry to come into lighting design from because they start with the product. Even though we're not really interested in product, we're really interested in the intangible stuff that is emitted and the interplay of surface and light. To kind of elicit an emotional response. But I think for us as a practice, probably in our DNA, because of my background, our philosophy is very much about the emotional connection that people have with the space. And I think that comes from theatre, by trying to sort of draw people in. In theatre, we use a term called the suspension of disbelief, which is about drawing people in and storytelling and getting them to believe that it really is whatever that particular set is that you're looking at. So for me, that's what light is all about. It's all about creating a space that people connect with, and whether that's a retail space, a tube train, an office, or a huge public realm space, it's really about connecting people. And yeah,
I think it's such a powerful medium. Like you say, we look at some projects, and you're exactly right. That interplay, that curation of light, landscape, architecture can often negate the need for a physical message or piece of communication. People are drawn to the light. If there's two doorways and one's lit, you're going to head for the lit one. I can guarantee it.
Well, exactly. I mean, look, I do say it a bit tongue in cheek because 50% of the time the world is in daylight, so there's nothing artificial light can do. We can never compete with daylight, nor would I ever want to. So of course, wayfinding is required, of course. But so I do say it a bit tongue in cheek, but at the same time, they should go hand in glove. I mean, from a lighting perspective, I don't ever want anybody to walk onto a project and think, "Wow, the lighting looks good." If they do, then my ego gets massaged. But I've sort of failed the project. Whilst it's great that everybody tells me I've done a great job, but I've failed the project really because it isn't about my ego. It's about people walking into a space and thinking, "Wow, this space feels amazing," and they don't really know why. And if that happens, then it means lighting, landscape, architecture, interior, space planning, acoustics, wayfinding. It's all working harmoniously together in an integrated way, and that's what successful projects are about. When that coordination, that collaboration kind of works really, really well. We're all kind of unsung heroes at that point. The project is greater than the sum of its parts, and for me, that's when I get goosebumps. I really do. It's fantastic to walk onto a site and see people living with it, and just using a space and loving it and not really knowing why. You're absolutely right. I mean, for us, hardly anybody compliments the wayfinding, but they certainly do tell you when it's not working. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we are sub-consultants to many projects, and it's especially in the Middle East now, where everything's kind of new build, and this whole range of consultants that we now have to collaborate with and coordinate with. Ultimately, if that works, and it's a big challenge, I think, for developers and lead consultants, and how
how they do that and how we do that efficiently and don't end up in hundreds of 5-hour meetings. I mean, you must have exactly the same challenge. Yeah, have you seen some changes? Certainly I have since 1999 when we first started. This growth in the design team, this level of collaboration, even with new tools like BIM, Revit, it seems that collaboration is even in some ways more difficult, more time consuming and more intense. I don't know how you find it.
Yeah, all of the above. It's a short answer. It's definitely more intense. It's definitely more demanding. It's definitely more expensive in the amount of computer software we have to buy. Revit's not cheap, that's for sure. So, we're definitely delivering more for either less or the same amount, and that's frustrating from a fee perspective. It's challenging. The Middle East is a really interesting market. I think a lot of the attitude in the Middle East seems to be, what's the minimum I can deliver on this job to deliver the job, and it's an attitude I hate because it's not right for the project. And I think we should come in with the mindset, what's the very best that we can do for the client? What's the best service we can deliver? What's the best design that we can deliver? And that's really hard because when we're pricing a project against somebody who really just wants to deliver the minimum documentation and get out, get in and get out, that's really difficult because you're not comparing apples with apples and trying to educate lead consultants. This isn't even about the end client. I think it's lead consultants that are taking us under their wing. A lot of the time they'll want the cheapest consultants possible because they want to be the most competitive at the table when they're negotiating with the client. So it's a real challenge. If we're not careful as an industry, and this goes across all sub-consultants and lead consultants, it becomes a race to the bottom. And I don't think anybody benefits then because even the client's not then procuring the best possible design or service, and the whole thing becomes a problem. So I kind of think as an industry, we should have more respect for ourselves, actually, and have kind of, believe in the courage of our convictions, as it were. Actually stand our ground for fees, stand our ground for service, and try and better educate clients. Because if we all do it, then the clients are going to start, I think, taking more note. And I do think over the last 20 years, certainly from a lighting perspective, 20 years ago, we barely had a seat at the table. The one thing I would say that's great about the Middle East is that almost every project requires a lighting consultant now. Less so in Europe, which is interesting.
We find exactly the same. You'll have briefs coming out of the UK that about, that you'll speak to an architect, and wayfinding, it's not even on the table. And then it turns into one of those situations where clients not asked for it, architects not pushing it. Why would they? And the project gets to a certain stage, usually right at the last minute when people are about to move in, and operators start asking questions about signage, and it becomes a rush. But in the Middle East, it's very unusual. We've been in Dubai since 2007, and we weathered the 2008 disaster. And since then, like you say, I think they get certain professionals in, and there's like a list of sub-consultants, and wayfinding seems to be on there. And I think that all the ambition that's manifesting from Saudi Arabia at the moment is just, it's incredible in some ways. And I get what you're saying. There's a lot of local competition that it does seem there's a race to the bottom, and it's almost like there's such abundance of work that they can do that. But just going back to, it'd be interesting just to talk very briefly about your process. I know as a sub-consultant you'll probably fall into the the REBA stages of work or similar, depending where you are. But what is your approach? Is there a way you go about it? How do you work?
A good question. You're right. You hit the nail on the head. We work REBA stages, so concept design, schematic, detailed, or whatever it's called these days. That's whole, tender, IFC, IFT, IFC, and so forth. So yes, it is a linear process. It's an ideas conveyor belt, and my team hate me for saying that, but it is starting with a brief at one end and hopefully finishing with a relatively snag-free project at the other end, and a glass of wine in your hand celebrating. What we're interested in is all that stuff between brief and glass of wine, I suppose. Other beverages are available.
Certainly in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly. I love a mango juice. The first thing to say, really, and I'm sure this will resonate, we're always brought on board too late in the day. It's far too late in the process. For us, the ideal time is probably when architecture or interior design or landscape is roughly 2/3 of the way through stage 2 is ideally. So we can get involved early enough to start affecting the overall design and integrating light wherever possible. Often we're brought on board to start our stage 2 when, the rest of the team are at sort of stage 3. Worst case, they're at stage 4, and that becomes really difficult because at that point there's probably abortive works that have been done, and we're trying to increase the thickness of a wall to get a light in it, or raise the height of a planter to put lights in there or something. We'd much rather have those conversations much earlier on in the process, for sure. So equally, it's really good on large public realm schemes if we can get board on board even earlier, stage 1 or master planning stage. It's amazing how often lighting gets overlooked at master planning stage. And I think it's really important, particularly on kind of citywide frameworks where you've got sort of different zones or different sectors or different, kind of areas which have got their own character and identity, looking at how you move from one zone to the next and that character changes, what happens at thresholds, overall light levels across a space, for example, the types of technology that we might use, the vernacular of certain types of product, to tie in with the identity of different areas. That can all be covered at master planning stage. And that's great because if you do it at that stage, inevitably different lighting designers are probably going to come on board for different parcels later on down the line. It just gives a framework within which other designers can then work. So I think lighting should be considered, and I'm sure you would say the same for signage. It should be considered at a kind of a high level earlier on in the project. And then our process is always to start macro and then kind of build micro. So you sort of focus down. So through concept design, we really want to understand what's the user experience. What do I want somebody? If it's a restaurant, is it in and out? And we want them to churn seats very quickly. Do we want guests to dwell a long time and drink lots of expensive wine? If it's a retail store, is it fast fashion? Is it boutique? Kind of high-end fashion? Is it, if it's an office, what kind of office is it? It's very much about what's the identity of whatever the project or the space is. How do we want people to engage with that space? That's what starts to define how we're going to use light in that space. So we start with the kind of the why, really. The why are we lighting the space? That's kind of what that's about. Only then do we start to sort of then whittle it down. If we kind of understand why we're lighting it, then we start to understand, well, what are we lighting? So is it a wall? Is it the floor? Is it arches, whatever it is, right? We understand kind of what we're lighting. And only once we've figured out what we're lighting do we start to figure out how are we lighting it. So certainly in my organization, if anybody goes and picks up a manufacturer's catalog doing concept design, they get a slap on the wrist. We shouldn't be looking at product. It's very much about the interplay of light, surface, and people. I often on CPDs present a little equation, which is people, architecture, and light. And if you get the three of them right, you end up with emotional connection and an emotional response, and that's what we want. So it's really only once we've been through that process do we then start whittling it down to what kind of product we're going to be using, what's the budget, is it apple juice budget, champagne aspirations, which is often the case. So how do we sort of marry those aspirations with the available budget in the available time, because inevitably there's probably not a long enough lead time to procure half the product we want as well. So, there are all of these kind of factors that we have to sort of marry. And somewhere in all of that, when we get it right, we manage to sort of deliver a detailed package that is fully coordinated. And again, I always remind my staff that even if it's not in our scope, if our scope affects it, then it's up to us to be proactive. So that might be an access panel in the ceiling. We're not designing access panels, but if we need one and it's going to affect the overall look and feel of a space, then we need to be proactive. If it's the lighting within the kitchen, and every time you open the door to bring the dishes out, the lighting of the kitchen sort of floods that nice, moody, sexy restaurant that you've designed, then it's important that we get involved and we try and attenuate that lighting. If it's wayfinding, for example, and you've decided to make a really dark, lovely core 10 or something, kind of signage structure, well, do you know what? If it's really fundamental to the project, then we need a coordination meeting with you to figure out how is the lighting. And if it's integrated lighting, and we often talk about signage and wayfinding being the fifth layer of light, actually. The first being ambient lighting, the second being accent lighting, the third being feature lighting, the fourth being sort of electronic media these days, a lot of digital screens, and then the fifth being signage and wayfinding. If it's signage and wayfinding and it's internally illuminated, and it's giving light to the space, then I sure as hell don't want it destroying that lovely atmosphere that I've created. So there's, again, a kind of collaborative an iterative process that has to happen, a dialogue that has to happen, so that we have kind of control of the overall lighting within the space. And again, that's not necessarily within my scope, but I need to make sure that I'm involved within it. So going back to my earlier point about fees, the reason we're probably a bit more expensive than some people is because we're going that extra mile to be proactive, and rather than sort of saying, well, that's not in my scope, and folding my arms and pushing it across the table to somebody else. So that's really important. So as a process, as I say, I guess it's a very long-winded answer, but our process is to start macro, work micro, and collaborate with anyone and everybody that is involved in the project to make sure that lighting is fully integrated and fully coordinated. And you know what? You really notice the difference with the final product at the end of the day. The final project lives and dies really by the way people react and interact with that space. And for a client, if it's an extra 100,000 potatoes, whatever, pick your currency, but whatever it is, if it's an extra 10% here, an extra 10% there, actually, at the end of the day, they're not even going to remember that. They're going to remember that the footfall is 20% greater, or the sales figure's up 15%, and we've got raw data to demonstrate that the value of a property can be increased by 10 or 15% if it's really well illuminated. And we've got data from retailers to show that where we've just changed the lighting, we've increased sales of one particular project by 46%.
Wow.
So that, you can imagine you're a multinational retailer and you've increased your sales in your stores by 46% just through changing the lighting. It doesn't matter how much you spend on lighting, frankly. So, getting that raw data is difficult, kind of harvesting that raw data, because a lot of people don't want to share it. But, if you're a shopping mall and it's a great space to be at night and people want to go hang out there, particularly in the Middle East, people love shopping malls. They're places that people want to congregate, particularly in the evenings. If you get it really, really well lit, the people will come, for sure. And that experience will be so much better. And, it's testament. You go and walk around Dubai, I can take you to a shopping mall, which is completely dead, and the lighting will be very uniform and very bland and really not interesting. And then I can take you to shopping malls, which aren't necessarily our projects, which are really interesting, not necessarily expensively designed, but really interesting spaces, great kind of consideration placed on where light is. And the footfall is very, very high. There are lots of experiences. It's not just anecdotal evidence. There is hard evidence there to show that it can really impact, ultimately, I guess, the bottom line for the end client.
It's always one of our challenges to have that data, that evidence. You give clients a lot of confidence when you can reiterate that you spend X with us doing this sort of process and you get your money back, or you'll see this increase. First, we try the same sort of language, time spent, whether it's shopping or time spent with the consultant. There's a bottom line cost to missing appointments in hospitals. There's bottom line cost for people getting to gates late at airports. But it's really difficult to find that evidence. And it's very difficult to extract what bit Wayfinding was in terms of that as well.
It's very hard to get that data. And also, again, goes back to an earlier point, if it's a fully integrated design, where everybody is kind of coordinated properly, then you shouldn't be able to extract that, because it should be a bit of everything. We're fortunate enough to have worked on a number of projects where the client hasn't wanted to do anything other than change the lighting. When those projects come along, it's much easier. It's just much easier to extract that data. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a relatively small percentage of projects. And of course, there is no guaranteeing, there's absolutely no guaranteeing that it's going to affect the bottom line. But I'm pretty certain it's not going to have a negative impact on the bottom line, that's for sure. And particularly if you understand the demographic of people using that space. And again, part of our process is to really understand what the space is, who the users of the space are, what the connection that the developer wants with that end user, whoever that is. If it's an office or if it's a mall or whatever, then it's all about understanding how people are interacting with that space. And then lighting is there really just to reinforce that.
Just going back to process in a way, but and again, just talking about that idea of coordination. So we all agree that a well-coordinated project leads to better environments, better outcomes. I think even clients would agree with that. What's the best way of doing it? Because we're finding, I don't know if it was a COVID thing, but certainly through COVID, I don't know if it's because people had more time on their hands, or we work differently because we're working at home. There seemed to be a exponential increase in these long half-day meetings with 50 consultants on the same call, and it was just a nightmare. For us, we felt that was a difficult and time-consuming way to manage coordination. And if clients give some indication that's how they're going to operate, our fees will start going up because that's a huge amount of time. What is the best way? Not every sub-consultant is probably as proactive as you. I mean, we're sort of similar. If we see something in a plan or an elevation that's we think is going to affect or have an effect on someone else's package, then we'll try and highlight it. And that is either just a cloud on a drawing or it is a phone call. But is it the lead consultant's responsibility to be looking at all these potential conflicts and managing it, or do you think individual consultants should just be more proactive, picking up the phone and having those discussions?
I think it's all of the above. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think we've recovered in terms of meetings and the need to spend far too long on too many meetings. I don't think that's recovered, to be honest with you. That's part of the problem with Teams. I mean, Teams is just the modern day email, isn't it? I started in the industry really only as email was coming in, and I probably do 10, 15, 20 times more work every day these days than I was doing 20 years ago, 25 years ago. That's just technology for you. It's supposed to have made it better. It hasn't. It just means I do more.
Exactly.
But I feel the same about Teams, really. I'm not a huge fan of Teams. I mean, it has its place, but there's nothing better than sitting around a table with somebody, getting a pen out and drawing and sketching and really coordinating. I think there's a lot to be said for the value of a good project manager. I'm not sure that lead consultants really in the Middle East do it as well as in Europe when there is a fully kind of independent project manager managing all of the consultants. I think they do it really well, and they figure out who's needed on a call. I think often it can be quite lazy just to say, I want everybody on the call, and suddenly you're there on a call for 4 hours and you might get 2 minutes, to say something. So, and I love vertical transportation and soil stacks, and it's great, but it's got nothing to do with lighting. So
if any clients are out there listening to our podcast, please listen to us.
I mean, so I think, look, at the end of the day, it's about open communication, right? We are very proactive. We'll quite happily push back sometimes, but it can be really difficult. We get RFPs that come through that state, you have to be on a call every week for the next 2 years. And you think, well, hang on a minute, if I price 4 hours a week, 104 weeks, just the meetings alone are going to be, blow your budget out the water. So I guess there's got to be a level of sensibility that's applied as well. But it's a real challenge because everyone will look at that differently, price it differently, have different demands. I don't know that we've figured out the final answer to that. Every day we're sort of trying and making it up as we go along.
It's the same struggle. I did want to ask you about, I read your sort of research and trends. Very useful. Thank you for providing such wonderful thought leadership. I think you talked briefly about sustainability and impact on the planet, but one thing that we've been asked about fairly recently, and I guess it's certainly in UK, Europe, with an ageing population, much more sort of attention to inclusivity, etc., was this idea of neurodiverse light. I know it's a bit off what we've been talking about, but please explain.
Well, neurodiversity is becoming a hotter and hotter topic, particularly in Europe. And it's an interesting one. I guess the wonderful thing about where we've got to in terms of healthcare, is that people are being diagnosed, with mental health issues much more than years ago, where you would have been told just to, there's nothing wrong with you, carry on, right? And it's not just about mental health issues, but it is people being overstimulated by various things, not just epilepsy, but people getting headaches from lighting. And so neurodiversity is really about understanding the impact on people's sort of mental well-being, which can then impact physical well-being. Lighting, is one of the primary senses, obviously, and there's not enough research at the moment been done. And there are people that will claim to get migraines through overstimulation, through too much light if the light's too bright. There will be people that will get headaches if the light's too dark. It's very much a personal thing, this, and we're really at the beginning of this journey. But in terms of neurodiversity, lighting can have quite a big impact. There's been a lot of research done on different colours, different spectrums of light, different wavelengths of light, which may or may not affect people's well-being as well. So, it's a really interesting topic. And I think as we're becoming more aware, and one of the great things at the moment, for years, people have sort of just left the workplace industry, because they can't go to work because they're sick, and people have been signed off for a long time. Actually, the more we become aware, the more we realize what a drain of talent there's been. Yes, somebody may not be able to work under bright lights, but that's not a reason for not to work. Let's find a way of attenuating that light so that people feel comfortable working. I've got friends that are incredibly creative, but they struggle with overstimulation. So and that can affect ADHD and autism and so forth. So I think as a society, we're becoming much more aware of it. Certainly in the last 5 years, I think that awareness has grown sort of exponentially. And I think, again, lighting is part of that. We're looking at the moment at a big research topic around schools and neurodiversity within schools. It might be that in classrooms, we recommend that there's more flexibility in lighting in classrooms and so forth, so that the naughty kid, and I say that in inverted commas, the naughty kids actually might not be naughty. They might just be being overstimulated. And when you look at, a lot of research now, you look at an article the other day where there's a child swinging, on a chair, and the only reason the child was swinging on the chair is because it was the only way he could actually focus. But the teacher just thought that the child was being naughty. So I think this enhanced diagnosis these days, and if we as lighting designers can help that, so it might mean that part of the classroom is illuminated in a much darker way, part of the classroom is illuminated in a much brighter way, and people can kind of gravitate towards whatever quality of light that they feel most comfortable in. So that's going to be really interesting. Watch this space over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years, I would have thought. There's a lot of research there. And then in terms of, you mentioned before, sort of age, we're an aging population. Well, macular degeneration of the eye is, again, quite important. If you're 60 years old, you need approximately 30% more light than a 20-year-old to feel like it's the same level. So if you've got a hotel, what are you lighting for? You're lighting for the retiree that's on their holidays, or you're lighting for the 20-year-old that's traveling. Maybe it's got to be both. So again, there's an understanding that's required of the demographic and the use, and maybe if it's a hotel room, the guest room is much more flexible. So we have more dimming and so forth. And I think a lot of it will come down to personalization of your desk space, personalization of your guest room, personalization of your changing room or your fitting room and so forth. So I think we're really at the beginning of the understanding of what is required. I suspect it's going to be a frustrating conclusion, because I think the conclusion will be that there isn't a conclusion, because I think it will be completely individual to each person. And that's very difficult to tailor, to light a space for individuals. And I'm sure, again, signage and wayfinding, that'll be exactly the same, because, you'll have somebody that can read one type of font, somebody else that can't read a certain type of font, somebody will need a certain brightness of a sign, somebody that will find it too bright. So trying to find that sort of balance without it just being kind of one size fits all and exclude anybody else, is going to be a challenge. But, it's for me, that's the most exciting.
Yeah, no, it's that whole idea of bespoke or tailored experience. Yeah, it's a similar trend that we see. And obviously, technology with individual phones and things like that can help with that. Yeah, we've had it forever in terms of languages. Most people speak one language really well, and then a small percentage of people speak a second language less well. So yeah, the Middle East is quite interesting in that respect. We always do at least dual language. But yeah, finally, we always ask guests about the future and how they see the future. I mean, just my anecdotal evidence, we do use illumination in signage, as we've discussed. And, the advent of the LED has changed everything, not necessarily for the better. You walk into some places and they feel so harsh and edgy and cold, and you just think, the FM team have just saved a few bucks here and stuck in some pretty nasty LED units. I mean, how do you see the future? I mean, apart from different luminaires, where's lighting going?
We are at the beginning of the beginning, really, and I mean that. We've had this kind of change from incandescent sources to LED sources. Yes, you're right. Some of them are good, some of them are terrible. Some dim well, some don't dim well, and so forth. So LED has a lot of problems. And it's probably the most polluting light source that has ever been conceived. From a sustainability perspective, LEDs are terrible, even though they're very low energy. Frankly, the old incandescent source, which was glass and carbon filament or tungsten filament, very few components, very simple source, from a manufacturing perspective, was a lot more sustainable than LED technology. So I think we sort of stand at the edge of this, sort of at the beginning of understanding the overall sustainability impact of lighting, right? So historically, it's been about energy consumption. That's it. So let's reduce the energy consumption within the building, which is sort of right. But we've got to look at the whole life cycle. How much energy, how much pollutant, what is the overall sustainability impact, environmental impact of those light sources, which then leads on to things like TM65 and TM66, which are a couple of technical memorandums on sustainability and recycling and so forth. There's stuff on our blog and our website around this. That is, the basis of that is basically recycling. Throwing into landfill is absolute no-go. It's not even an option. Recycling actually should be the final option. What we have to look at is repurposing, reusing fixtures and fittings and figuring out how we do that, because that's how we have the lowest environmental impact. So I think when people ask me, what is the future? Well, the future is really starting to understand not just what the capital expenditure is, but what the operational expenditure is, and understanding it's a CapEx, OpEx, total budget financially, total budget from a sustainability and carbon footprint perspective. I think that's going to be really important, understanding what the whole kind of carbon footprint of the project is. We can all design low carbon buildings, right? Low carbon schemes. Really quite easy these days to do that. The real issue is it fails because we've designed it, but we've used cheap product and we have to then replace them every 6 months or every year. Well, that's not a sustainable way of doing things. So it's great that we've delivered a sort of low energy, low carbon project, but it's not a low energy, low carbon life cycle. And that's what we have to be looking at, right? And at the moment, everything is geared towards what is it day one? So but what is it day two, day 100, day 10,000, whatever.
That operational carbon use.
Yeah, totally. And that's important. Then I think we're also getting now into the realms of what's the water footprint of the building or of lighting, and how much water the water cycle has gone in, how much damage have we done to the water table as well. So we're looking at that. Obviously, we are now starting to look at things like neurodiversity. So what's the impact of that scheme on the people that are using it as well? For the last few years, we've had this buzzword, which is human-centric lighting, which is complete nonsense. Everything we do is design. What is design if it's not empathic, and what is empathy if it's not about humans? So everything should be human-centric. If it's not, then it's stupid design, frankly. So, it is about, I guess, continuing that. So the future is, it's a bunch of stuff, but it is about really understanding our impact on the planet and on the people that inhabit it, and doing all of that while still continuing to make it interesting and well designed. That's the challenge, and inevitably, I think it will be about looking at energy budgets and carbon budgets and understanding where to spend money, or maybe we spend money or spend energy or spend carbon. And I think there'll be some areas that we might spend a bit more and some areas where we might spend a bit less. And I think that's kind of critical to successful design moving forwards. We probably need a government or governments that are going to somehow incentivize that thought process, because until people really see it affecting their bottom line, they're going to be less inclined to go with it. Right now I can go to a client and say, look, you can have light fitting A and it's going to cost you 20 quid. You can have light fitting B, which it looks and performs exactly the same as light fitting A, but it's made from 100% recycled materials and it's going to cost you 10 times more, right? The client's not going to go with that one. They're going to go with the cheaper one. So it has got to be a way of incentivizing more sustainable design. And that's down to government and probably tax breaks somewhere. And I don't think anybody's quite got their head around that yet. So that's going to be an interesting challenge moving forward.
Yeah, interesting future. I think those sort of challenges, they affect all areas of certainly our world, all sub-consultancies, be it landscape, buildings, HVAC, engineering, the whole 9 yards. But I think sustainability, it's big now, and it's just going to get bigger. And I think it's a new creative challenge. Well, look, I'm sure our paths will cross again, and it'd be good to stay in touch. Thanks so much for your time, and hopefully
you're very welcome.
Some of our audience will, certainly all the competition that listen to our podcast can agree with a lot of that we've been discussing. So really interesting. Yeah, good luck with the 7th office you're opening?
7 now. Yeah, it's aging me.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. All right, chap. Good to meet you.
You too.
Thank you for listening to our latest Wayfinding Xchange podcast. Stay tuned for further episodes and feel free to contact us with any questions and suggestions for future episodes.